Welcome to our next session on managing farm stress and distress. And basically, it's going to be some mindset tactics for brain health and behavioral well-being. So when we take a look at stress and just what stress does to people's lives, to their minds and things like that, we also look at the opposite of when we're stressed is actually what I call desserts, because if you spell stressed backwards, you actually get the words dessert. So something that's more pleasant, more pleasing to us. And when we take a look at our lives, we sometimes look back at all the stresses that we had, and sometimes we kind of think, those are actually some blessings that actually happened during our lives. At that point in time, we thought they were stress, but how do we try to look at some of the stresses in our lives as being actually just backward blessings? It's just they're tough to deal with at the time, but they will bless us at some point, hopefully. We also realize that life is difficult. So we take a look at, it's full of chaos, and whether it be in our relationships with our people, with money, with time, things like that, life is just full of chaos. And part of our goal in life is try to reduce our stress levels by trying to bring this chaos into more order. And so a lot of people have this mindset that life should be stress-free, it should be fat-free, illness-free, money-free, grief-free, whatever free you want. Okay, but we realize it is difficult and we need to process through some things. And if we have this mindset that we're always supposed to be free of this stuff, it's not a healthy mindset for us to have. So the goal is to put life in order, to do that proactively, to have that internal locus of control, to put life in order, to overcome those difficulties, those crosses. And that's how we grow to higher meaning, as I've mentioned before. So acknowledging life is difficult, internal locus of control, and instead of making a to-do list, maybe sometimes in our lives, we need to make a to-be list of who do we want to be in 5 years and 10 years down the road? Who do you want to be tomorrow? Or who do you want to be today when we walk through that door to meet with our families? So we realize that COVID and other challenges have been really a challenge in social interaction. So how do we keep our mindset looking very forward-looking versus a defensive protective mode? So layers of stress that we talked about in some of these other sessions just adds compounds onto the issue. And so when we take a look at what's the emotion even behind that mask, sometimes you're walking down the street or in the store and you try to smile at people. They don't even know you're smiling, or you can't tell that they're smiling at you. So again, that motion behind the mask, and how do we take those masks off? So when we think about stress, how do we handle stress itself? Okay, and that thought process of how we handle it is sometimes more important than the stress itself. So a 30,000 person study showed that there was a 43% increase in dying from stress, but only for those who reported being under stress who also thought that stress was bad. Now think about that. For those who didn't think stress was bad, there wasn't a difference. So believing that stress is bad for us has a correlation, okay, but not a causation. So when we take a look at those that have more adaptive cognition, so their thought processes are more positive or more adaptable to handling the stress. Okay, so again, it goes back to the concept I shared earlier in a previous session about that internal locus of control that we have in looking. So again, just that mind over matter, how we think about our stress can actually help alleviate our stress. So farmers think that all stress is bad, and this is one of my concerns that we working with farm stress over the years. Maybe they think all stress is bad because that's what we tend to tell them, and that's what's in the media. So all this attention to the negativity of stress might actually increase people's emotionality to that stress, okay, even causing more stress. So again, we need to kind of take a look at our mindset of how we perceive stress in our life. So those who think that stress is bad have increased heart rate and blood vessel constriction. Those who think that stress is good, they still have the increased heart rate, but the blood vessels stay relaxed, just as experiencing joy and courage. So acknowledging arousal and performance stress as good is good. Distress is not so good. So that's what we need to understand, is how we keep from going to or into distress. So I'm going to step back a little bit and take a look at this tale of two minds, because I think it's ever so important when we take a look at not just farm stress, but anybody's stress. Okay, so we have this protective mindset in the back of our mind, the amygdala, who has this thing that we're either, if something happens to us in our life, we're going to fight, we might flee, we might do a few other things or whatever, but it's just basically, it's there to protect us. It's a human instinct that's grown millions and millions of years into our minds. Okay, there's not an easy way out of it because that's how we are natured to operate. Versus our higher reasoning mind, our prefrontal cortex, okay, that help us to think through all those protective negative emotions to actually move us through that. So what are we going to do when stress comes for you? So that primitive mind, it magnifies the risk. It puts us, like I said, in a protective mode. And when you think about things like hesitation, should I do this? Or the guilt, why did I do that? The shame, the fear, a lot of impulses, especially negative impulses in our lives. So there are a lot of protective emotions that are negatively exhibited. Okay, so again, those emotions are good, but they get negatively exhibited because we can't think through them or can't overcome them. So we take a look at that prefrontal cortex, that higher reasoning mind. So when we get under stress, that primitive mind cuts off all operation of that prefrontal cortex or higher reasoning mind to focus on the threat and to keep us in that protective mode. Okay, so again, as we evolved over time, you take a look at the guy with the fork. It took us a long time for us to posture up straight, which I'll talk about a little later. And now we're kind of getting that hunchback again, looking at the computer. Interesting how history might repeat itself. So the solution to distress is often minds apart, and I say that very literally. So the tale of two minds, when we take a look at mental or physical risk. So we instinctively, when we have these risks, go into this protection mode. It's just an instinct that we have, again, million years of brain development. We focus overwhelmingly on the risk, and sometimes we become overwhelmed by those risks. Okay, we refrain from our higher purpose reasoning, which is not good when we're under a lot of stress. And we often self-defeat our own good behaviors because our mind is so caught up in that protective mode. So we avoid possible pain, our protection, much more than seeking better gain, okay, that higher reasoning. So what can we do to use the best of both minds? So we realize that our minds have this internal conflict where we're trying to protect ourselves, but we're also trying to get away from that. And our protective selves are actually trying to hold our higher reasoning mind back. So we can actually trick our minds into better deal with stress by different types of things, what I call we can hijack or we can hack our minds to more better reasoning. So we kind of hijack this Jersey and this Holstein cow to get the best of both worlds on this one. So one tactic that I tend to use if I can't think straight or whatever, I'll start counting backwards because that's not normal. That has to engage my prefrontal cortex, or I might even more difficult do the alphabet backwards. So if I'm coaching a basketball game or reffing a basketball game and I'm starting to get yelled at, okay, instead of getting into that protective mind and starting to have my ears turn red, I'll get my prefrontal cortex going just by simply doing something like that, just to make sure that I'm thinking higher reasoning. We're bigger than this. When we look at the human function curve, I just love this graphic here. So stress and tension is a reality. There's good stress and there's distress. So when we take a look at our performance on the left side axis going up, and we take a look at arousal stress on the bottom axis, and we take a look at our performance, we all have a comfort zone. Okay, so we have this tension, and I want you to think of maybe this orange thing as kind of a rubber band. So we have this act of stretching, this act of growing in good stress. It actually causes us to do more with our lives. Okay, when we get to straining and breakage, okay, it gets to a certain point that it actually becomes overload and it can actually break, and this rubber band can actually cause us into breakdown after we go through exhaustion and some ill health and some trauma and things like that. So it's a very important thing for us to keep in the mind is that there is a good a portion of stress that is actually quite good. So our goal is that too much is not. We want to make sure that we don't get ourselves into this distress. And there's this level here, what I call resiliency. And we can actually take our comfort zone and actually try to expand that comfort zone. Okay, we can also increase our performance, but sometimes getting top performance might cause way too much stress or more stress than it's worth. But we can increase that resiliency by learned skills to increase that comfort zone as well. And that's kind of what we're after in these sessions. So how do we think outside the box? We're told to do that a lot, but we need to make sure we stay within our comfort zone to do it, because optimal human function is not at one's highest performance level. And yes, we get a big dopamine response every time we perform something and we succeed at it. We get a nice little dopamine response, a good reward within our minds. But we can push ourselves for higher performance, but at what cost? Okay, so workaholics. Okay, so I tended to be one early in my career. And so, how do we make sure that we don't overextend ourselves? So, living beyond the margins of time. And you can just kind of think when you don't have enough time to get everything done, just the agitation and the anxiety that that can actually work with. When we don't have enough energy, okay, we start expending ourselves. We might not start eating the best or whatever. So physically, we might not feel quite as well. We have margins of focus. We can only concentrate on things for so long, and our minds or our attention spans are actually getting less and less. And so, how do we focus on brain health and a few things that we work with? We also have, margins of relationships. Relationships take time. Self-care, exercise, eating right, that takes time. So all these things go into our brain health, they go in our behavioral health, and it's all part of that human function curve. So we need to operate inside the box, within the margins. So think outside the box, but operate inside the box. So our brains tend to have our neuron code. Okay, so we can actually change our thoughts with this code. We can actually change our emotions. And each one of the major emotions that we experience actually has a different piece of the brain that can actually work with them. But a lot of these negative ones actually happen in the back part around the amygdala area. So families who reinterpret initial negative situations to more positive meetings are more likely to do these: to be in control of their stressors, which would sound extremely important, to find possible solutions to crisis situations, again, extremely important, and to adapt well eventually to the crisis. Okay, yeah, they might go through the crisis, but they tend to adapt well. So it's very important for us to realize that we can reinterpret negative situations to more positive meaning through these neuron codes. So the damage of negative facials on brain health and just relationships is something that just kind of intrigues me. Okay, so we think of the negative emotions that are portrayed with this guy here. So there's three that I want to pick on. So the damage of disgust. So all three of these emotions kind of come from the back part of the protective part of the brain. They give kind of a cortisol release. It's kind of a negative thing that kind of stresses us out. Sometimes we have this disgust attitude towards the source. It could be something that happens that's unclean. It could be a person. Okay, it could be a behavior, a moral or immoral behavior. So we also have this distrust, okay? And distrust is a lot different than trust. It comes from different areas of the brain as well. What don't we trust? Okay, so our negativism toward the markets, the systems, the spouse, it's kind of like those that have that external locus of control that they just can't trust anybody. Okay, sometimes maybe they can't trust themselves to do the right thing either. And then the frown, okay, so this frown, the scowl is that kind of the opposite of the smile. So when we're frowning, it's more difficult to plan, to communicate, relationships, have good decision making. So if you flip that around when you smile, it is actually using a more positive piece of the brain. And I think those things become a lot easier. So the protective brain has our backs exhibiting negative facials. Okay, so again, when we experience these negative things in our lives, the negative facials will actually just automatically use that protective brain. So that cortisol concern long term. So if we live our life with a lot of these negative facials, a lot of negative emotions, a lot of that distress in our lives, and we have high doses of cortisol daily and weekly, monthly, lasting for years, it can actually change our nerve endings, our brain receptors. Okay, it can actually cause brain damage. Okay, so thinking positively is actually good brain and behavioral health as well. So the way we face stress can help us better face stress. I say that literally. So when you take a look at the smile versus the negative attitudes, just the positivity, and that smile can actually bring about some changes, I think, with people's minds, especially for those that have personalities, in my mind anyway, that are kind of more the feeler type. So facial movements in a research project, and they actually looked at a lot of research projects here, had small to medium effects on self-reports of happiness, anger, and disgust. Okay, so when we take a look at that, even if they only have small ones, because sometimes we get criticized with this facial stuff, and even if they don't have small ones, just think of your own life and what a smile does to you if you walk in the door and your spouse or your kids are smiling, or you do that for them, and how contagious it really is. And so when you look at yourself in the mirror, do you want to see a smile, or do you want to see one of the guys on the right? Okay, so when you take a look at just what it impacts, be your own scientist. What works for you? Because maybe it doesn't work for everybody, but I know a lot of people that sure seems like it works for quite well. So I'm going to just go through what I call my BS moment, okay? Because simple thoughts of breathing and smiling does just not come normal to a lot of people. We think about cows or livestock when they get under stress, or your pets, your dogs, okay? A lot of heat stress, and what do? They start panning. So when we get anxious and we don't feel good, or we get excited, okay, so our breathing might be one of the first things we start not doing very well, because we might be taking a lot of short breaths, and just it's not healthy for us. So I'm going to do this BS minute to breathe and smile. So I'm going to ask you to, you can do this now if you want, to just lay, recline, sit, or stand in a relaxing position. I tend to do it whatever posture I'm in at the moment when I have a few minutes to do it. Eyes open or closed. You can actually kind of sublime, try to think of something positive as well. Okay, breathe in slowly and actually fake smiling if as you do. Hopefully you have a real smile, but if you have to fake the smile, do that as well. Breathe out very slowly, fake smiling all the way to the bottom, and then to chuckle, which is a fake laugh at the bottom of the breath. Okay, so usually you can do about 6 or 7 of these in a minute. So I want you to slow your breath, and every time that we do that, I want you to breathe deeper, okay, smiling wider and chuckling even heavier each time you go through, for a total of about 1 minute. So smiling and laughter, we realize it has a very mimic reflection. It's often quite contagious. And so after doing so, people tend to report this, that they feel better and more relaxed and less stressed. The smiling continued at least shortly afterwards. Sometimes, I mean, it seems like once the habit happens, it tends to last longer and longer, having more energy and more enthusiasm afterwards. And as important is that frowning was more difficult shortly afterwards. And if it wasn't more difficult for you, then just try to do the exercise again and try to frown right afterwards. And then facial disgust, to try to make a facial disgust reaction. It's actually more difficult after your muscles in your face were actually just trying to smile. And again, if it doesn't happen, do it again and see if that happens for you. But overall, well-being tends to increase. Okay, so it's just a simple one. I know there's a lot of smiling and breathing exercises out there. This is one that I tend to do as I'm doing something that I really enjoy, or if it's something that I really don't enjoy and I need to try to keep a positive attitude, I'll try to bring this one to the table. So the BS minute is anything but BS. Okay, it increases serotonin. Okay, so this next thing I want to kind of go through is standing tall. So we're now dealing with some mindset tactics. Okay, so the smile and the breathing, one is called posturing for success. So the neurochemistry of victory and defeat, what I call success and failure, can either be very self-promoting of who we are as a person, or it can be very self-defeating. And it often depends on our posture flexion. Okay, our posture reaction when things are happening in life. So just like smiling, posturing actually increases serotonin. So how do we tend to have a look up and a stand tall posture as we're doing things? Okay, so I actually had a fellow ref said something to me one time when I was ref, and he goes, you know, why put your head down? Just stand up, look tall, very confident out there. And I was amazed at how it actually does make a difference in your refereeing ability and just your forward thinking ability. Okay, so it works for me too. But shoulders back, it increases serotonin, very positive, happy hormone within our lives. So serotonin drops when we feel defeated, as our posture droops. We look down, we feel threatened, hurt, anxious, or weak. So again, whether sitting or standing, work with your posture. Okay, so when we want to lower our social status or to just lower our attitude, it's a very simple process. Just simply lower your posture, and it will actually happen automatically. Okay, and just take a look at people that you see that have good posture and not so good posture, and just what your perceptions of those people are. Okay, so again, standing tall is posturing your mind and your body for more success. So there's also a research project. This was a popular YouTube video on the 2-minute power poles. Okay, just to act like the Incredible Hulk. Shows that it increases serotonin levels, testosterone levels, decreases cortisol. And sometimes I don't have 2 minutes to do this, but I might have 10 seconds to do it. Just doing it once or twice makes me feel better. So I think there's something to it. So taking care of self and your perspective situation in life, we realize that there's some farmers out there and some pet owners, they take better care of their pets, their crops, their livestock than they actually care for themselves. So sometimes we might be our own worst employee working for ourselves, or our own worst boss telling ourselves what to do. Okay, so how do we take better care of ourselves and not be some people? Some people wallow in self-pity, even when things are good. Some people treat others with more respect than themselves. They have this thing called self-esteem, where thinking everybody else is better than they are, or they have this jealousy kind of concept against the don't be some people. Some people amplify their suffering and they amplify their stress just to get attention, or by branding it as some kind of social injustice, whether it be unfair markets, no respect in society, or whatever. Okay, some people refuse to strive to improve. So realize from a psychological perspective that neutral is not good. Okay, we as humans, we need to be progressing and moving on. So don't be these some people, because these some people are not happy no matter what happens. So in order to improve, we must do these four things. Have a desire, or at least admit that there's a problem. Take responsibility, okay, that internal locus of control for one's life or for the problem. Act accordingly. Again, that goes into that internal locus of control, being proactive. Let's do something. And I realize sometimes if the stress is too bad, it's difficult when we're truly in distress to actually act and concentrate and actually make decisions. And then that gets us into that last point of get help if needed. So if we are into that point, how do we still be proactive, not passive? Get help. But if we find somebody that can't just help themselves, maybe we're the ones that need to get help for them. So neutral is not associated with personal growth or happiness, as I mentioned. So we might work harder just to maintain the same level of success, just to keep our head above water, but just keeping one's life or one's finances above water in a positive stage, okay, that is actually making progress. That's a positive thing, okay, to work with it. So it's not neutral. So brain health is tied to heart health. So we realize that oxytocin, and for us that are dairy farmers, we realize that that's the milk letdown hormone. Okay, to some, it's a neurohormone that fine tunes close relationships. So anytime we feel physically close to somebody, we're probably increasing the secretion of oxytocin in our blood. Okay, when we have good relationships, we have empathy with other people, health and support for people that we care about. Or again, we work with, and it doesn't have to just be human to human. When I was in Belgium, I was actually out on some farms, and they would actually have these happy cows that people could actually come and lay with the cow out on the pasture. Okay, and I suspect part of the things that they're getting out of that is it's increasing their oxytocin levels, just their feeling of closeness to another being, whether human or not. So oxytocin pumps out as much adrenaline when under stress. Okay, so it actually is a stress hormone as well that actually motivates us to seek support, to tell somebody how we feel, to work with somebody. Okay, and we realize that a stress response is actually being surrounded by people that care about us, or we care about them. So on the flip side, if we don't have that closeness and relationships in our lives, what do we have? There's a lot of people in this world that are walking around with loneliness. Loneliness is the equivalent of smoking about 15 cigarettes a day, according to some UK research. Okay, so how do we stay close to people in our lives? Because the opposite is not good for us physically or mentally in our lives. So oxytocin protects the body. The heart has receptors for oxytocin, can help repair or strengthen and repair it. So in reaching out, feeling closer to others, again, physical touch, connecting conversations, more oxytocin is released in our bodies. Okay, it's a stress response with a resiliency component as well. So again, I think it's important for us to understand oxytocin. So oxytocin can help put us in a better mood. Okay, so again, feeling close to our animals as well. It doesn't just have to be humans, can actually increase oxytocin levels as well. So a happy tip is to do something for others, which can really increase our happiness, or we can do something for the planet, which can still give us connection and increase our happiness for others, or do something for ourselves. Okay, so with the self-care, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth, but this is actually a research when people were under some stress. Okay, they were actually asked to do something for others, do something for the environment, or do something for themselves. And they actually found out afterwards is that those that actually did something for others, a random act of kindness or just a kind gesture, okay, actually received the most benefit and were the happiest afterwards. Those that did something for the planet, they were still doing something for something, okay, didn't receive near the benefit as those that did something for others. And again, those that just did something for themselves, took a vacation, this, that, or the other thing, they really didn't see a huge benefit in happiness. So brain health is also tied to routine. Okay, there's a lot of research out there just on the routines that we have. Okay, it's necessary, especially for distressed people. People are suffering from anxiety and depression as well. It helps people make better decisions. So anxiety and depression cannot be easily treated if that sufferer has unpredictable daily routines of when they go to bed, how much TV they watch at night, when they get up in the morning, what do they do when they get up? Okay, because that system is tied to mediate negative emotions. It's tied to proper cyclical or just daily biological rhythms that we each have in our brains and in our bodies. So, observational research indicates that individuals in good health engage in highly routine behaviors. Okay, so for those that are successful at maintaining weight loss, they often eat the same foods, engaged in consistent exercise, and they don't skip meals. Okay, so again, routine is actually pretty important to our lives as well. So brain health is also tied to gut health. Okay, so I'm going to just basically say I am not a nutritionist. I've worked with dairy nutrition over the years. When you take a look at to get ourselves feeling well, I've got some personal experience with that. But also reading the literature that behavioral health is a function of gut biochemistry and is heavily impacted by the diet. So serotonin, which is the happy hormone that we've talked about in previous sessions of 90 to 95%, depending on the literature you read, is secreted by the gut, only 5 to 10% by the brain. So again, brain health is tied to gut health. So turn off the news while eating. Okay, so even mild distress can actually tip gut microbial balance, making one more vulnerable to infectious disease and give us a negative nervous system feedback. And I can notice that when we had the news, used to have the news on at times eating meals at home and just the attention that people were spending there. And it was always kind of a negative emotion about and negative things would get brought up at the table because of it. So again, turn off the news while you're eating and think of something more positive. So know your gut feeling is cooperating with your brain. It actually regulates both mood and cognition. Okay, so both the emotions and our thought processes. So brain health is also tied to added sugars and processed carbs, kind of a pet peeve of mine. Again, I'm not in nutrition, but as you look at the literature, the sugar that we eat in 7 hours today is what a person in 1822 ate in 5 days. So we're eating 3 to 4 times too much sugar. So much like cocaine, sugar is very addictive as the brain receptors release dopamine. They create more receptors for dopamine, thus we crave it even more. And that's how addictions start. So a common fact is that this extra sugar in our body spikes insulin levels. And from Mayo Clinic stack, we know that insulin and weight gain often go hand in hand. Okay, it's just a vicious circle. So your brain on sugar, it's pretty clear that excessive glucose in the form of refined sugar can be very detrimental to our brain health, ultimately affecting our attention, short-term memory span, mood stability. Okay, coming from Teresa Aubeli, who's a neuroscientific researcher at Florida State University. So when we take a look at high glucose levels resulting from this quick, easy sugar intake, slowly but surely damage cells everywhere in the body, especially those in the brain. So sometimes when you take a look at that extra cookie or what people eat for breakfast, you know, the donuts and have a lot of processed carbs or a lot of high sugar cereals and things like that. So we realize having too little glucose or having too much glucose are both problematic. Okay, and it's actually kind of a big a roller coaster type thing when you get too most or too much and then it dwindles to too little. Okay, it's tough to keep it on an even keel, but either extreme can leave you feeling woozy, nervous, fatigued, or shaky. So when we take a look at relative hypoglycemia, it's one of the most common causes of neuropsychiatric illness treated by a diet high in protein and fat and low in carbohydrate. Okay, so this is an older study, but I still see it in the literature that people are referencing this. So how do you really emphasize healthy fat and trying to get the refined carbohydrates and those sugars out of your diet? We definitely need some of them, but too much tends to be problematic. So preliminary results of an Italian study indicate that perceived work stress can be statistically associated with increased blood glucose. Okay, so again, farm stress, our diet could be a part of that process. So our distress causes high cortisol release, causing craving of that pleasurable food intake, especially again, the added sugars and the unprocessed carbs. So less sleep can also initiate this craving, spiking the insulin. So sleep is highly tied to all this as well. So again, I tend to like to say one is often blind to the robber until we're robbed blind, which I think is a sugary truth. So brain health is also tied to smartphone use. So this is another kind of a pet peeve of mine is just when you take a look at natural brain biorhythms are redirected by smartphone usage and focus on that smartphone and the constant interruption. So dopamine rewards users with each like, with each post, with each search. It can actually become quite addictive as well. And the people that are putting everything on the phones, they know that. They get you to use it. So it can be as addictive as a slot machine, providing this excess stimulation, increased emotionality, decreased real social interaction. It can actually move users into distress with all the constant interruptions, the notifications, the dopamine releases, social stimulations, these unending searches, and the conjuring of both real and false spectacles of life, which I think is a huge one that comes up in the research as well. So the natural rhythms of the brain are interrupted. And that is not normal for this human brain. This is something new for us. So every 6 to 12 minutes for most people, these smartphones are interrupting our brains, with many struggling to go even 10 minutes without the phone. So again, one is often blind to the robber until robbed blind. It's kind of a smartphone truth as well. So those who are constantly connected, research will show, are more stressed. They feel lonelier, even though they're more connected to their phone and all the people on the phone. They're more likely to experience depression or a sleep disorder. Okay, so regular use of social media increases the likelihood of both envy and depression. Again, all the social relativeness, who are we relating to, who are we comparing to ourselves to, and also with depression, because what happens when you don't get what you want on the phone? Okay, and I've seen instances where kids walk in the room and they start crying just because, well, somebody just said something this to me on the phone or was in a text message or whatever. Okay, so smartphone use can actually reduce performance, but there's also research that no phone use might not be the healthiest thing as well. Okay, but so it's good to a certain extent, but it can reduce performance, social interaction. It can actually reduce our sleep, the blue light, our mental health by increasing stress, anxiety, depression, envy, and other types of mindsets as well. So using a phone to get this feel good dopamine response, needing more of it each time to get the same level of response. And then we find out, well, it just isn't there. So then it ends up in negative emotion, anxiety, depression, false reality, and those spectacles thereof. So don't let family relationships hide behind the screens. I've just noticed that, just as I come out of classrooms nowadays or just walking in different types of situations that I get involved with, and you try to talk to some of the students and their minds are all in their phone. They're not even talking to their fellow students because their minds are all in their own phone and trying to have a conversation with them, and how much more difficult that's gotten over the last 5 to 10 years with this generation that actually grew up with their smartphones. And again, what's it doing to their brains? So farm families might need a digital detox. Okay, so disable notifications that are stealing attention for the real moments at hand in these farm families, those moments of joy, that mindfulness of just what's happening. Okay, so my detox phrase is family before a phone. Smartphones might need their places. Okay, again, that blue light inhibits melatonin, reducing both the quality and the quantity of sleep. So at night, keep it out of sight, keep that smartphone out of mind. Find another clock to actually provide your alarm for. Smartphones are secondary to relationships. Okay, so again, it's changing, like I just mentioned, in households and classrooms on the farm. When dad comes in from chores and everybody's either into the TV or the smartphones trying to have a conversation, it just gets tougher and tougher. So, how do you get dopamine raw, which means face to face conversations? So, being bored is more important than checking this every 5 minutes. And research will actually show, especially with youth, that being bored, we just don't have enough time to be bored. Okay. Boredom actually creates creativity. We think of things to do. We do new things. Okay. There's a lot of things that boredom actually creates. So being bored is more important than checking this phone every 5 minutes, because why have the phone tell you what to think? Why have the phone tell you what to do when you can try to think of some of that stuff on yourself? So oxytocin is an underappreciated stress release. Okay, so I think this slide might have gotten out of order here. When we take a look at farm distress, it's experienced when one senses a loss of the control. So there's a lot of things that we lose in life and we lose control of, not just as we age, but loss of direction, finances, the way of life. Sometimes our farm and family dreams, our expectations, our hope for the future, our security in what happens as we come back to the family, one's position in life, or sometimes when tragedy strikes. Okay, so we realize that farm stress is experienced and we need to maintain that sense of aim, our direction, our control, our positive thoughts. So people that have a larger why, okay, the virtues of something larger than themselves, okay, seem to be able to deal with problems in a healthy, more proactive way. So he whose life has a why can bear almost any how. Okay, so I shared this with the Dairy Girl acronym as well. So know your why. Don't lose your why. Don't lose your hope in life, because when people start losing that word hope, that's when concern really falls in. So keep that hope alive. So behavioral health sometimes simply hold your breath. So research shows that holding one's breath for 15 seconds significantly helps people purge the urge to let the feeling passes. So we realize that most of the emotions they might last 30, 60, sometimes up to 90 seconds. Okay, so how do we just kind of purge the urge, take that deep breath? So maybe I'm thinking about having this little snack or whatever. Okay, so how do I just purge that urge, take that deep breath, and just let that urge actually pass? Because in giving time, it will give some logic to overcoming it. So in experiencing failure, research shows don't be too hard by guilt, okay, on yourself. Okay, so otherwise shame increases sometimes our anxiety if we feel guilty or shameful of what we just did. So again, the easiest example sometimes are some weight loss type things, and we just actually ended up having this bowl of ice cream, which I love to do, and some snacks with it or something like that. Okay, so am I better off to feel guilty and get down on myself and put my protective mindset in gauging it, instead of trying to think, okay, so let's just forgive myself. So I made this mistake this time. Let's not try to do it again, and use my prefrontal cortex. And research will actually show that those that aren't too hard on themselves, okay, um, are actually better off to not repeat their behavior compared to somebody that's very hard on themselves and feels a lot of guilt and shame, because again, now we're in that mode where we need to comfort ourselves and using that protective brain to do so. So hold a breath, stare at that sweet snack, and just let the urge pass. Okay, so again, easier said than done. So behavior health is also tied to communication skill. So we need to realize that other people do not think and feel the same way. So again, personality wise, we try to mold people into our way of thinking and our way of doing things, and that they should feel the way we do. Okay, so premise number one is others do not always think and feel the same way you do, but still we need to resolve conflict and we need to have conversation. So others may have different values, and whether those values are right or wrong, they have different values. Okay, and some people are not going to compromise their values, and I wouldn't encourage them to, unless there's a moral, ethical reason for that. So when you take a look at, if somebody's glued to a point of view, it's difficult for us to see somebody else's point of view. Okay, even though we don't agree, can we try to at least understand? So anger can skew a person's point of view. So again, a secondary emotion. We're taking a look at that protective brain when we take a look at anger and all these negative emotions and these negative facials. Okay, anytime we're in that mindset, it will skew our point of view. We're not forward thinking. Positive feelings can change a person's reality. Okay, so again, some of those techniques to take a look at to try to stay more positive, which can help us use our prefrontal cortex as well. Okay, so that primitive mind again focuses on that protective self. So, what's the best for the good of all is one of the things we tie into these communication skills. So, negative feelings can change another person's reality as well. So, it not only changes our reality, these negative feelings, because we're in that protective mode, it can also change another person's reality. Again, that transference of negative emotions goes pretty darn quick, both positively and negatively. So, when distressed, expressions of care and sympathy are not quite as effective and genuine. Again, so that self care of ourselves, getting plenty of sleep so we're not quite as irritable. Okay, it's good research on that as well. And just eating, getting exercise. Okay, just taking care of ourselves will help us be more genuine as a person. And who doesn't want that? So active listening does not guarantee that the message was received correctly. So we can go through listening skills all day, but until we start repeating back, this is what I heard you said. Okay, is that true? Okay, and let them validate what we had. Sometimes that active listening needs that next step to be validated as well. So again, we talked about transference, that emotions quickly transfer to others, both positively and negatively. So let our smiling, let our laughter, let our joy be contagious to other people as well. So judging other emotions and intentions is often a faulty judgment. So I will grant that women tend to be a little bit better than men at trying to judge emotions and intentions. So with the nonverbals, they tend to read them a little bit better. But research will actually show that our judgment of other people's emotions and intentions is often faulty, which makes us realize that not only active listening, but also validating what people are saying is a pretty important piece of the communication skill mindset as well. So one skill, again, is to think good, well-wishing thoughts to those that you meet. So this is based on a research project where people were asked to go out and just walk around and just every person that they see to give a well-wishing thought to that person. Didn't even have to do anything besides think something. Okay, when they came back and they started talking about, who was happier, the people that gave the well-wishing thoughts were undoubtedly the most happy group of them all, beyond the control as well. So a few other mindset tactics that loss can build across. Again, those difficulties in new life can actually resurrect us to a new meaning. Even if you have to go through a lot of grief to get there, there can actually be some new meaning in life. Pain can turn to gain, as you've also said. So just anytime we're experiencing a lot of stress, let's do something. Okay, just shorten up that distance between where we're at and that stressful event, and let's try to get ourselves nearer and nearer to try to alleviate versus keeping that distance and just thinking about it and wallowing about it, which actually can increase the distance between where you're at and to overcome that stress. So stress can turn us to best. It helps motivate us. Again, there is such a thing as good stress. Grieve to believe in the love of what was lost. So grieving is not a bad process either. It is a good grief process that we went through in one of the first sessions. So a couple other just quick ones before we start closing up is that, can you get yourself a phrase of the week? That this week I'm going to smile. No matter what situation I'm confronted with, no matter what person, I'm just going to smile. I'm going to try to be happy and see if I can actually change the conversation a little bit more positive just by doing that. Some people that I know love to do this where they have words of the year. Okay, so my word of the year this year is to try to stand tall. Okay, and breathe and relax. I try to do all three of them at the same time, but just simply standing tall. And I can feel in my posture that I feel more confident and able to work with things a little bit easier. So the mindset tactics aim to give us inspiration, and they also aim to give us higher levels of reasoning using our prefrontal cortex. So the value of being versus doing things, one other mindset type thing. So moons ago, life was a lot more about being. And it was a lot less about things. Our lives in this United States of America are cluttered. They're cluttered with things, they're cluttered with activities. There's always something to do. Okay. And so when we take a look at being versus doing and the cost of things as well. So, how do we become more mindful? Because research will show that those people that try to live more in the present, not in the future, not grudges of the past, okay, but live in the present, make life more about being in the present and less about things and less about doing things. Okay, so again, mindfulness. Okay, to take the time to be versus the time to do or the time to take care of things. So again, we have these time pressures. We also have these to-do lists. We've got a lot of things in life that we want to do to get things done. But I think as important is have a to-be list. Who do you want to be 5 years down the road? Who do you want to be at the end of the day? Who do you want to be after the end of these next couple hours? Okay, what can you do to change your life? Okay, in those different time frames. So tight margins of time, energy, attention that we mentioned early on. Focus more on short-term threats and pleasures. Okay, so when we have all these time pressures, okay, again, we're kind of in that protective mode. It's the threats and just the impulses of threat of pleasurable food intake by, for instance, okay, versus long-term vision and long-term happiness. Pretty darn important to the psyche of being positive. So anxiety, problems with health and relationships, okay, as we meander through the chaos in life with less time for being and more time spent on doing and fixing things, just taking care of things. And I realize out there on the farm, there's just a lot of things that have to get taken care of. Okay, so I don't want to diminish that. We do need to take care of things and we do need to do things, but how can we try to be more mindful about being? So human beings versus human doers or humans that are just tied to things. So be mindful of the present, breathe, smile, stand tall, take care, have respect for yourself, be proactive and be responsible for both self and for life. Realize that life's value goes well beyond the farm and leave the pity parties to attend to higher virtues and higher values. Okay, so don't be those some people that we talked about. Swap the processed carbs and the added sugars out of the diet if it's too high in your diet because it can cause a lot of problems. Don't let screen time deplete your dream time, that time to be bored, the time to be creative, to just get out and do something, maybe grab a new hobby. Generosity and gratitude, the research behind that, increase our happy hormones. So be generous and be gracious. So we're going to close this session again with a meditative prayer in caring for you and yours. So again, whoever we pray to or for or with, to help me to use my higher reasoning thoughts to better face and manage my emotions, breathing deeply and smiling widely, chuckling as well, caring in my words and actions, cautious in what I eat and drink, and be careful of my smartphone, exercising to my heart's content, portraying positive posture, attitude, and intent, keeping my ears to the ground for others, that generosity, with my eyes fixed on the bigger horizon, looking forward and upward for myself, and again for my greater why in life. Amen. So again, thank you for your attention. So this will actually conclude all 4 of the webinar series. This one was on the mindset tactics and brain health and behavioral well-being. So I hope that all these webinar series in total helped increase our brain health and our behavioral well-being and trying to reduce some of the farm stress. And again, as we look back at some of them, the grieving process, the personalities, dealing with people and all the communication skills. But again, I think these mindset tactics are pretty important puzzle to help us not get into that situation of distress. So again, thanks for joining.
Larry, we've got a few questions, and of course, we'd like to encourage everybody to open up that chat box and type in questions. Actually, with the crowd we have, do you think we could actually just have them unmute and ask questions?
That's fine with me.
Okay, well, let's go with the first ones we've got. Are there certain personalities that are more prone to negative emotions that may also be more benefited by tactics like smiling and posture?
I think that's a great question, an interesting question, because when we take a look at personalities themselves and all these facial expressions, and again, let's just take smiling for instance, is that there's a lot of people that kind of negate the positiveness of it, and certain research projects might show a benefit and some others not, but they're taking a look at general, just general people in general. And so when I take a look at some of our farmers that are more of the feeling type, or just other people that I know that are undoubtedly more of the feeler type, I think they're definitely can be benefited more by just trying to get the positive emotions going. And when you take a look at the feelers, sometimes when things aren't going as good, they tend to get more of the negative emotion going, and sometimes that negative emotion kind of overcomes a lot of the positive emotion they might actually have as well. So it actually kind of draws them down a little bit more. And so I think it's probably, of all the 4 that I went out and talked a little bit about, when you take a look at the 4 trait theory, I think it's those feelers that are probably the ones that are most prone to it, which should also, I would say, might be the ones that might be helped the most by things like smiling and posture and things like that, because they'd help them feel better.
Okay. In our circle of friends or family, we all have that person who just never smiles. How do you start a conversation about that with somebody in your circle?
Okay, so some people that never smile, it's kind of an attitude. They might want to, just kind of share that, because sometimes they want them to feel sorry for them, this, that, or the other thing. There's other things in their lives that are really keeping them down, but sometimes it might be actually be an intent with it as well. Okay, so simple things that I tend to say is that, and somebody told me this years ago, sometimes when people are not very happy, they might not be happy with you, but continue to say hi to them, continue to smile and try to be in a good mood and try to work with them. And I'll be darned if not sometimes over the course of a year or two, I just people kind of tend to come back and they tend to have a more positive attitude with you over time. So when we take a look at people that are caught in a lot of negativity, I tend to think that, we can kind of feel, sympathize with them and kind of get to their level. And sometimes when they're experiencing grief, we have to do that. But I think, the concept is we sympathize with them too much, or even let them wallow in that too much and don't make them be responsible. We tend to teach them to feel sorry for themselves. Okay, so versus having some empathy, having them try to, work with the more positive emotions. Yeah, I know you're experiencing this, that, or the other thing, but can we try to look on the bright side? Can we, see the light at the end of the tunnel? Just some simple things like that I would just kind of advise. So I don't think it's anything major. I think it's a lot of simple things that we just continue to try to be more positive with them.
Okay, we all understand that there's times in farming that it has to get done. Uh, Dairy farmers especially often don't get enough sleep. How do you go there and talk to someone about that?
Okay, so I think that's actually a very difficult one. And so when we talk about not getting enough sleep, like the less hours of sleep that you get, you probably get higher quality. At least the hope would be that you'd be higher quality sleep with it. So when farmers don't have enough sleep, um, and again, we can pick on the dairy farmers because they're milking those cows a lot of times every 12 hours, or sometimes their people are doing it every 8 hours. When you take a look at that thought process, their mind's always tied to that next milking, and it's sometimes difficult to get that sleep. And plus, they're trying to intermingle family time into their meal time, socializing and stuff like that. So it's very difficult. I think of farmers, of all the groups of farmers that I know, I think they're the dairy farmers are the ones that have the toughest time trying to get that sleep. Okay, so if we can't get that quite the number of hours of that 8 to 10, that's actually, which most farmers would actually think that's ludicrous to even try to get that much sleep. But when we do get 6 hours or we do get 7 hours, is it good? Do we get that TV turned off? Do we get that blue light out of it? Other things like, alcohol can actually keep us up and kind of cause us to have less quality sleep, and some other things can actually do that. I know farmers that put earplugs in, just kind of this is my time to sleep. Put the earplugs in, kind of work with that, get the phone out of the room, other distractions and things like that. So again, whatever kind of works for us, I think getting enough sleep is kind of like being your own scientist as well. You got to do what works for you. Some people put on the music. We've got these waterfall type sounds and things like that I've noticed a few people that actually tend to use and actually work with it because it gets them more sleep. So whatever works for them, I guess.
Very good. Uh, Two more questions and then we'll check back to the list to see what is come in. Uh, you mentioned a doing and being list. Is that being list actually goal setting?
Um, Actually, in a sense, it might have something to do with that. But that's a great question, Fred. So when you take a look at goal setting, okay, so that it's the whole concept of who you are in the future. Okay, but there's also this concept of mindfulness about who we are in the present, and that's kind of what, when you take a look at brain health, one of the things they're really trying to teach people is to be more present to themselves, to others, versus always thinking about what's that next thing to do. Or when we're having conversation, we're always maybe thinking, what's that next thing I'm going to say? Okay, but how do you just be mindful about the listening skills and work with that whole concept? But when you take a look at stress, another thing that causes a lot of people a lot of stress is to be out of order. Okay, we talked about that order and chaos at the beginning. So people that tend to what I call more left-brained, or they're more the orderer type personality, they actually can reduce their stress by thinking more of the future. And then sometimes when you take a look at how they're going to plan for that future, is actually that goal setting and actually writing some of those things down. So I guess this is kind of a question where I can actually talk out of both sides of my mouth, and I can actually follow research on both sides, because we definitely want to be more mindful, but we also want to be more orderly as well to work with it. So when people are always thinking of that next thing that they have to get done, so it's kind of like that the time margin, that pressure to always get the more and more done. Okay, that's what I think causes the most stress, because it causes us not to be mindful of what I'm doing right now. It's kind of like, how can I get this darn thing done so I can move on to that next thing? And we're always looking at that next thing in the future. And again, that's not the healthy thing. Be mindful in the present, order the future. It's a simple way to do it.
Okay, and I guess we got a question that came in. Okay, let me read that. Beef farmers calving now aren't getting much sleep either. Does interrupted sleep, waking every 3 hours, impact this?
And I would say no doubt. Okay, so there definitely are different times of the year when other types of farmers are definitely going through this. I remember when I was a young kid growing up, when the sows were farrowing, and my dad had to get up, through the night, just multiple times just to check on this, to check on that, or whatever, you can definitely tell. Just so there's definitely other, especially livestock enterprises that work with it. So whether the goats are kidding, or the sheep or cat or lambing or whatever, you have a lot of these livestock enterprises. It's more seasonal, but for dairy farmers, it's kind of day in and day out. So it no doubt impacts it. And so hopefully the time frame is shorter. And I think when we take a look at some of the sleep habits, if we can't get that at night, is there a way we can get that nap in the afternoon just to kind of recharge our batteries? Because I think sometimes people don't get their sleep interrupted, or we have the added sugars and just a bad diet that just causes us to not function so well. We actually need that little nap, and sometimes it actually takes some sleep to actually recharge us and kind of reset our mindset to actually move forward with the next thing. So I would definitely say, if possible, at least we can get sometimes even a 15 to 20-minute power nap, laying on our back, maybe using some of that breathing, smiling technique to try to get ourselves relaxed in a short order. I remember, back in the day when I was milking cows and also working off the farm, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I wasn't getting that much sleep, but it's just amazing how a 15, 20-minute nap after I got done milking before I went to my next job, actually, I think helped quite a bit.